The Gender Mainstreaming Evaluation Framework.
Chapter 6. Guide for Administering the GMEF Tool. As a self-assessment tool, it is expected that the application of GMEF tool will involve the whole organization. Members of the organization's GAD focal point system should lead the conduct of GMEF assessment. Other key technical officers working on GAD mainstreaming should also participate, as well as any staff member from relevant offices who can facilitate accomplishing the tool, such as program implementers or service providers. Representatives from regional offices may be invited during the GMEF assessment, while attached agencies, especially those with mandates that are different from the central office, are expected to conduct a separate GMEF assessment for their agency. The agency should establish the timeline of the assessment process. The GMEF tool should be disseminated to the administering team. This will enable them to prepare corresponding means of verification or supporting documents needed for the assessment. The agency may group together relevant offices or units to accomplish a specific questionnaire most relevant to their functions. Each group may report its consolidated ratings for further discussion and enhancement. The group must agree on the answer for each item. The GFPS may set a deadline for the submission of incomplete or additional MOVs to complete the GMEF assessment. Once the GMEF assessment is done, the GFPS members should ensure that all MOVs are properly secured as reference for their next assessment. Let's now proceed on how to accomplish the individual assessment questionnaires. There are 4 sets of GMEF organizational questionnaires representing each entry point. Each has a maximum score of 25 points, divided by the number of questions per sublevel. The 4 organizational assessment questionnaires will yield a maximum score of 100 points. The questionnaire contains the following columns. Descriptor refers to the series of questions to assess whether an organization has complied with a gender mainstreaming element in the GMEF tool. Questions in the organizational assessment questionnaires vary in number per entry point. Score. This column shows all possible scoring options for the descriptors, as no, partly yes, and yes. It also includes criteria for the proper assessment or rating for each question. Score per item. The organization should write the score or rating per question in this column. At the end of every sublevel, a subtotal GMEF score should be indicated. Means of verification or remarks. The last column identifies the required MOVs to validate the score or rating for each question. It also contains additional questions to substantiate or justify the score or rating received. Let's try answering the first indicator for policy entry point. If the agency has issued policies articulating support to all 4 essential elements of GAD planning and budgeting, then it gets a yes and should indicate 1.67 in the score per item column. Note that each descriptor has different rating scales with total maximum score of 25 points. Let's also try answering one of the indicators for people entry point. If only selected members of the top management attended, the organization gets partly yes, and 0.41 should be indicated in their score per item column. As a means of verification, the organization needs to list down top management officials who attended. Here's a sample descriptor for the Enabling Mechanism Entry Point Questionnaire. If the organization utilized 5% or less of total budget to implement GAD PAPs, then it gets a score of partly yes, and 0.5 should be indicated in the score per item column. The organization should then attach the GPB and GAD AR of the same fiscal year. Lastly, Programs, Activities, Projects Entry Point Questionnaire. If the impact assessment of GAD PAPs is still ongoing, the organization gets a partly yes, and 0.5 should be indicated in the score per item column. The organization should attach a copy of the Gender Impact Assessment Report of the organization's GAD PAPs. If there are indicators that are not applicable to the agency, indicate not applicable in the score per item column. This will not be considered in the total GMEF score. However, don't forget to specify in the remarks column why the indicator is not applicable. Some documents may be used as MOV for more than one item. All scores for each level should be added at the subtotal GMEF score rows. To get the total GMEF score per entry point, add all the scores in the subtotal GMEF score rows. Remember to transfer all the scores to the GMEF score sheet and add the 4 total scores to come up with the overall GMEF score. The scores obtained in the assessment will determine the level of gender mainstreaming efforts of an organization. Descriptors with yes responses are the strong points of the organization. It should maximize these strong points to hasten the institutionalization of GAD and target interventions to sustain efforts on gender mainstreaming. Meanwhile, descriptors with no and partly yes responses are areas for improvement. The organization should analyze the facilitating and hindering factors and target interventions to further improve its overall level of gender mainstreaming. For example, under the PAP's entry point, the organization has not developed GAD orientation module with gender sensitivity as a core competency. The gender issue may be the limited awareness among HR staff to integrate GAD core messages in existing modules for new employees. The results of the GMEF assessment can serve as important inputs in the preparation and enhancement of the organization's GAD agenda, which is the basis in the annual formulation of the GAD plan and budget. Agencies may re-administer the GMEF organizational assessment questionnaires after a specified period of time to keep track of the progress of its GAD mainstreaming efforts. It is important to remember that agencies are not required to submit their GMEF ratings to PCW for validation. However, they are encouraged to inform PCW of their GMEF assessment results.
PCW hopes that government agencies shall use the GMEF to know the status of their gender mainstreaming efforts and further guide them to advance gender and development in their respective organizations. Let's continue to champion women's empowerment and gender equality. For more information, visit www.pcw.gov.ph.